Hi, I'm Kelly Beckwith with Tulip Cottage Quilts. Today we're going to talk about my New Beginnings Fusion quilt. I'm going to show you some of the tools that I used to assemble the quilts, and we'll go through some of the tips and tricks on making the blanket stitching and also crocheting the blocks together. So some of the tools and supplies that we use I have here for you. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the fabric. You can use two different kinds of cotton, one for the front, one for the back. They can be the same, or you can use a variety of fabrics depending on what look you're going for. I did two quilts. One I did all of the front and the back from the same line, and I've done one where all of my back was just this fabric and I had a different fabric on the front. And just an example of another thing that you can do is you can do a 4-patch or any quilt design that you want. The only thing to keep in mind with your block is I do recommend doing a 1/2 inch inseam when you put your sandwich together and turn it. And that's just so that when you are doing your 1/4 inch seam here and doing your blanket stitch, you're not pulling the fabric. It can bunch if all you did was a 1/4 inch seam and then you're turning. This can get a little bunchy. So I actually did a 1/2 inch just to kind of keep the fabric out here a little bit, and it just helped this all lie nice and flat when I went to do that part. But you can do like a 4-patch is a perfect design because there are no points that you need to match up. But really you can do anything. Just do keep in mind that your 1/4 inch or your 1/2 inch inseam may eat up a little bit of your points when you go to put it together. You can also just do the 1/4 inch stitch around the outside here, which holds everything down, and it does catch your turning seam in there, so you don't need to go and whip stitch that shut. But you can also go to town. Quilts, do any design you want. If you can do hand quilting, machine quilting, make these blocks as unique as you want. So we're gonna use cotton batting in between the layers, and you'll put them together, right sides together, and then you'll sew your 1/4, leaving a 2 to 3 inch space to turn them. Clip your seams on each corner. That will help everything lie flat. And when you go to turn them, then we are going to use this tool. If you don't have one of these, you have something else that turns your corners, that's great. You can even use a pencil tip, like a mechanical pencil tip or something that doesn't have any ink or lead or anything that will write. Just be careful when you go to turn them to make sure that you aren't pushing through the fabric. One of the reasons I do love this tool is that it allows me to get my corners turning started with the bigger ball, but then when I'm really poking those corners, I can do this, and I've never had this go through because it is rounded. It doesn't cut through and tear the fabric. So this is just a great tool, but anything you have can certainly be used. When we go to do the blanket stitching, you can use a friction pen or any pen that you have, a visible ink. You can use it to mark your lines. I included in the pattern for you the spacing. It is not a perfect 1/4 inch, which is why I included the lines for you to use. You can see this piece is well loved. But just take a piece of cardstock, cardboard, anything firm. You can even use template plastic, anything that you can make the lines on, and you can penetrate with a pin. When I did mine, I actually marked my lines according to that paper because, like I said, it's not a perfect 1/4 inch, so make sure you're using the guide that I included. And then you'll take and you'll actually just pin it right here in between your 1/4 inch seams. So where you had your 1/4 inch allowance, you want to make sure that you're using the corner there. Should always be your starting and stopping, and then there'll be 20 additional lines. So from here to here, there should be a total of 22 lines altogether, not counting these diagonal corners. Once you get those marked, you have two choices. You can mark them with a friction pen, and if you're working on a light fabric like this, that's perfectly doable. It'll be easy to see. If you do start to get into some of the darker fabrics, for instance, the square here, when I did try to mark the lines, they were just a little bit harder to see. So when I did them, I just pinned this on and marked all my lines. And as you can see, there was no damage to the fabric. The pin didn't poke through and leave any permanent holes or anything. but it does just make it easier. So it's really what works for you, what you're comfortable with. If you don't want to deal with that, moving that paper, and you want to mark it as you go to town. Another option is when you go to actually do your blanket stitch, you're going to want to use, well, first of all, you're going to want to use a leather needle. And these are easy to find. You can search for them. The reason you want the leather working ones is, one, it has a larger eye. Let me show you. You can see here, it has a larger eye for putting this thread through the yarn that we're going to be using. But two, it's more durable, so as you're pushing, you're not going to bend that needle, and it's made a super sharp tip, so it really pushes through the fabric layers and comes through nicely. If you do find as you're working with this part that you start to have trouble getting it through, and it is can be tough in the beginning, just working it through all those layers. And again, that's a great reason to use cotton. If you start to get into some of the other battings, you could find that you have more issues with that. But one of the tips that was recommended that worked really well, and I'm going to actually show you this on a project that I'm working on, and this is the same basic concept, but I'm making a table runner. So I've gone ahead and I've marked the lines on this, and I used a blue friction pen to mark the lines. The great thing about the pattern template that I gave you for this is as long as you are making any of the blocks in a half or a whole inch finished size, these markings are the exact markings you're going to need no matter what size you make. So if you are doing something even as large as this, I used the same template. I just lined it up, and you can see I lined it up and it made all my lines, and it still came out with an even number of stitches, because the even number of stitches is the key to this. That's what you're going to need to make the crochet pattern. So as long as you end up with an even number of blanket stitches, you'll be all set. So you can adjust your blocks in any size. You can make them smaller. You can see, I apologize, I did have a smaller block. I'm not sure what I did with it. You can make your blocks smaller, you can make your blocks larger. Just stick to that size and that pattern will work. Here it is. So you can see the first quilt that I did, these blocks are actually a little bit smaller, but the spacing is the exact same. So the stitching is also the exact same. So tweak it, adjust it, make it work for whatever works for you. But for this example, I'm going to show you on this. It's got cotton batting in between, and it's just two pieces of the fabric. I've done my 1/4 inch. You can see here I actually did a crosshatch design on it. I've marked my lines, and when I go to do my blanket stitch, if you are struggling and having trouble, make sure you don't do it on your seam, but you can actually just take an awl, and I use a cutting board behind me, and go right above the stitch into the line and pierce it through. So it's gone through, and you can do, sorry, a little easier if I have it facing me, you can go through and do a few at a time, and once it pops through, you just keep moving on, and what that will do is it will just make it a little bit easier for you to penetrate with the needle and come out of that hole without really having to fight it, because the hole's already big enough to fit the needle through it. So once you have that done, you can then take and start. And I said in the direction to use like 100 inches of the yarn, and that is really a good number to get all the way around the block. It seems like a lot, and it kind of goes against our intuition to have a piece that long because you think it's going to tangle, but I've actually never had one get tangled. You know, I'm conscious if it starts to feel a little twisty, you let it untwist itself, but I've never actually had one twist a knot on me, and it eats up so quickly working through a blanket stitch that I've just never have had any problem with it. And you can see we did the awl in this corner, and that just came right through without any trouble. So to start your blanket stitch, you're going to come up through the back, and you're just going to come straight through to the front. You're always working right above this 1/4 inch line, because this line right here is going to be your guide, and as long as you're working on that line, you're going to keep your stitches nice and straight. You start from the back, you don't knot it. You can see there's no knot. You don't tie it off. We're gonna actually tie it off once we finish. We're gonna come back up the side around and we're gonna tie it just in a nice square knot right in the top. And that's gonna get buried in our stitching when we start doing our crocheting. So you don't need to worry about it being seen, but it really just makes it easier and less cumbersome when you're working to do that. So we have our first stitch. And then if you don't know how to do a blanket stitch, I'm gonna show you real fast, but there's also a whole bunch of tutorials. You can go on YouTube or Craftsy. There's plenty of outlets out there for you to go in and do it. But you're gonna come through and then you're gonna just make sure that you work through that loop and come up the top. And we have done the first blanket stitch. Now you can see here where it's nice and crooked, it's hanging over. That's not a problem. When we come back through and finish, we're actually gonna loop it, stick it through here and pull it up, and we're gonna pull that straight before we knot it. So don't worry about that at all. We want it to be like that for now. It'll work itself out. So I would just keep going all the way around until I had all of my stitches done. And I'm gonna go ahead, do another stitch here. And then I'm gonna finish this, and when I come back and show you, here I'm gonna do the last couple stitches so that I can show you the corner, and then I can show you how to finish it off and catch that.